I'll share some information about that too here. So this is what's sort of going on since 2015. The number of ranchers and processors, and again, with processors, we need to really get down, we track the purchases that come in from processors, but we sometimes there might be some double counts sometimes with processors because they may be processing more than one type of product. So what we do know is that, so this data is actually from current up to 2021 data. So at this point in time, we had 58 ranchers that were participating in the farm to school program. And that could include those that were raising poultry or beef or pork. And we had 74 processors. Those processors could be producing, there may be some overlap there, or there may be some double counts with the processors. And about $657,000 in state funding had been spent on meat products. And then there you can see the different types of cuts that we're able to find in the procurement claims, documenting how much school districts roughly paid for those cuts for beef and pork. And really we had the best information for in terms of the price points for ground, but you can see there's quite a bit of variability in how much sponsors are paying for ground beef, from $2.45 to $6 a pound. So, this type of information is helpful talking to the industry about what they might be able to expect in terms of a price point when they're selling products to districts. And then from school years 2019 to 21 was when we saw the highest percentage of procurement claims so far for ranchers. So 20% of funds went to ranchers directly in school years 2019 to 2021. So I'd really be interested to hear from you all why you think that is, considering all the national supply chain disruptions we had, more folks looking to buy direct because of that situation due to the pandemic, and what types of products might have been pretty easy to handle at that time, knowing that meal services were slowing or shuttered. So that's what's going on there. I did want to just quickly tell you about a project that we're building off of that we actually just wound down. This was a funded project with Healthcare Without Harm and EcoTrust, where we were coordinating a community of practice of school buyers, some of you may be on this call, as well as hospital buyers, with the intention to help them source more local protein products and set some criteria and specifications for purchasing those products. Of course, this project was funded during the pandemic, so there were quite a few challenges with getting it off the ground. You can see some of our advisors at the bottom of the slide there who were really helpful in guiding us and getting us through the project. But during this, we were actually able to develop a couple of different products that we tested with students, school nutrition staff, and hospitals, and wound up with these two products you see here on this slide: a beef crumble, which was both grass-fed beef and had other non-meat ingredients in the crumble, so vegetables mostly, and fish jerky. And so these two products, there were many different types of prototypes that we tried and ideated and got feedback on from school nutrition staff and hospitals. But these were the two that, at least during the pandemic, were the most likely to be of interest. And so right now we're at a phase where we're going to be sort of resurfacing those other prototypes, different types of seafood products, and a couple of other meat ones. I think there was a meatloaf and a shepherd's pie, and taking a look at those again with some different sources of funding, and trying to work with manufacturers to determine whether these would be economically viable in terms of production. But these these you see here, the beef crumble and the fish jerky were the most liked among students. And then for the nutrition service directors, the beef crumble rose to the top immediately. So I wanted to share a little bit about that and where we're headed. And I can talk more about that if it's of interest at a later time. But those were the slides I had for today. I'll turn it back over to Melina.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. I wonder if anyone has any questions or comments for Amy about the information that she shared. Awesome. Okay.
I do actually, sorry.
Great.
So I do have a question, and maybe it's not pertaining to like this part of the presentation, but I had a meeting with our local cattlewomen's and cattlemen's association, and there are local providers that are wanting to be a part of the farm to school program. And they are wanting information on how to go through that process. In Eastern Oregon, the huge drawback is that we don't actually have a USDA certified site. I know Billy Bob's in Elgin is working towards that. But they are wanting the steps so that our kids, like our local kids, can have Roner beef or whomever is around in Baker County. And so how would we go about doing that, or how can I information share that to the producers, because they are willing and they are wanting to make sure that we have beef in our schools?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So, I mean, right now there's, all meat that's sold to school districts has to be processed in a USDA inspected facility. And there's really no alternative to that, except there's no alternative to that at this moment in time. The Oregon Department of Agriculture just received approval by the USDA to establish its own state meat inspection program. And so what that means is that, theoretically, the state will be able to inspect and approve smaller firms or smaller plants that have been operating under the custom exempt laws in Oregon, meaning they're processing beef and selling it direct to consumer, but they haven't been under USDA inspection. They're either not large enough or there's not enough volume. They aren't selling to retail or wholesale markets. And so until the state meat inspection program really comes online and you see some of those smaller firms become interested in getting state meat inspection certification, all ranchers will need to use a USDA inspected facility for their processing if they're to sell to schools. We do have, and to help firms become ready for ODA inspection, we do have a meat processing grant program that was also approved in the last legislative session for $2 million. We have, I think, 6 different firms that are receiving those funds to make the necessary infrastructure upgrades so that they can come into compliance. We still have to, ODA, the state still has to inspect to the USDA standard. So, the benefit is that it does give these custom exempt facilities the ability to sell within the state. And so it gives them broader market potential. And theoretically, the state can help them cost share some of those expenses through the grant program and other ways. But it will be probably some time. All of this will take some time to really come fully online. And so, I think the best thing to do is, and I think we've shared this with this group, is look at that USDA slaughter approved slaughter facility list in those locations. I think I can't remember. I'm pretty sure that the the firm you just mentioned, Kara, does have a grant right now from ODA, and I did share those grant recipients, those processors that received the meat processing grant in Oregon. So the good news is that it's likely they'll be coming into compliance at the state level and we'll be able to sell to schools eventually. It's just, I'm not exactly sure when that will happen. So, I think that's one of the best options at this point is to, yeah, you have to have the meat slaughtered at a USDA inspected facility. There's really no way around that for the next few years.
I guess that was not so much my question. I know that it has to be processed at a USDA certified site. My question is these producers are wanting to become a part of the list of the approved farm to school selling producers so that they can outreach more schools and sell more beef to them. So that we can use our farm to school money.
Yeah, we can get them in the Oregon Harvest for Schools directory so that more districts know about them. There's a lot of different things we could do to help with that.
Yeah, Amy, I think what she's asking is it okay if the meat is processed in Idaho? And it is. Fine. Right?
So I was just texting Rick to double check. So first of all, Kara would say connect those producers, those ranchers with Christy so that Christy can help get them into the directory, the Oregon Harvest for Schools directory, and offer any other sort of technical assistance support for your region. And then the second, because Christy is the regional hub for procurement in your region. And then the second thing is, I think we need a really clear answer. And Christy, maybe you've gotten this from the Department of Ed, but if the beef is raised in Oregon, but processed in Idaho, can the producer in Oregon be compensated with the farm to school funds, but not the processing fee or something like that? Is that the way it works? Or I need clarification personally around that. But I know that, for instance, I just was on the phone with Rick about a dehydrated fruit product, that the fruit is grown in Oregon, but it's dehydrated and packaged in Washington. And he said that would still qualify for use of farm to school funds because it's grown and or processed in Oregon is the language around what qualifies. So does anyone have Amy, do you have a clear answer from ODE, or is that something that we really, or Christy, that we really need to get like in writing somewhere around like what how the funds can be used when the processing is happening in Idaho or another state?
Well, my impression from Department of Education is that usually this is handled kind of on a case-by-case basis. In particular with the border, I think with the border communities and border counties, it is something that we've honored in the past. So there's a company over in, as Melina's saying, we do know there's a company over across in the Columbia Plateau that has processed Oregon fruit, and Oregon schools are buying that fruit. So I think it's really fine to do that, especially in some of the counties that border other states where there may be some of that shared industry in the supply chain. So, and if it needs to be in writing, I don't think that should be a problem on asking Department of Education to make that more clear. I think what would be, something that they would maybe, disapprove of is maybe a product that's going, farther away to be processed and brought back to Oregon. We've had a couple of requests recently come from a food maker in Salem that had a processing facility in Kentucky, and because of labor shortages had to shut down their Salem plant. And so they had a question, we've been working with them to determine how much of that Oregon product's going all the way to Kentucky and whether we should allow that. So I think in this instance, and in some of the other situations where you have counties on the border that are working, in Washington and Idaho and Nevada and California, I think so far we've approved those. We haven't had any that we've rejected. So I don't think it should be a problem going forward. And if it needs to be in writing, I think Department of Education would probably be agreeable to that.
Yeah, Rick just texted me back that the answer is yes, grown and or processed. So the grown part works for those ranchers. And I think, ask him to put together just some really clear language around that so that we can share that out, because that seems to be sort of like one of the biggest questions that we get and confusion. So thanks for bringing that up, Kara. Does that help answer your question? Like between Christy and knowing that if the beef is raised in Oregon, it will qualify?
Yeah, that clarifies a lot. I will pass along Christie's information to those producers.
Great. Thanks so much. So we also have Ann Levins joining us from the Central Point School District, and I'm so grateful, Ann, that you could hop on the call. The other two nutrition services folks that we're going to share with us, of course, got pulled into kitchens this morning. That is just the way it goes. I'm sure you all know. So Ann is just going to share a little bit about how she has been successful in procuring beef for her child nutrition program, and then be available for you all to just ask any questions that you might have of putting that into practice. And Anne has procured beef in a couple different ways. So I'm hoping you can share just a little bit about how that process has gone for you.
Yeah, it's been very simple, I suppose, lucky in where we live that there's a handful of different processors or growers and processors willing to sell to us, who are also willing to get their product to a USDA facility and back safely. But really, we buy kind of from anyone that solicits to us and the price is right. So we've bought from 3 different ranchers. We have one who's pretty consistent, and we get ground beef. We've gotten short ribs, I think, and roasts and some other items that I'm trying to recall now. For us, we're pretty flexible, especially in the sense that we don't necessarily need enough for every site. We might order a small batch of something for our high school, or
I think we lost Anne, Melina. Oh, you're on mute.
I was just trying to figure out if it was my computer or if we all lost Anne. Hopefully she'll come back. Text her. Oh yeah, we lost her. I think she's on her phone. I'm hoping that she can come back, because I know that Anne's also purchased from FFA, and I know that was a question that came up from this group at one point. So hopefully she can join us again. She says she thinks her internet went out. She's texting me. Well, while we wait for Anne, I wonder if this group has any particular questions or things to share around purchasing beef. So we started this group kind of in response to like some questions arising and wanting to make sure that folks had the support that they needed to get local beef into schools. And what Amy and I are sort of working towards is some sort of resource that would be shareable, that would be simple, about the different sort of pathways that nutrition services folks can purchase local beef. So curious what questions you all have so that we can make sure that resource is meeting everyone's needs. And I'm just looking in the chat really quick. Kara said, where's that, Christy? The FFA. Yes. So yes, here's Anne. Maybe Anne can. Yay.
I'm so sorry.
Hey,
I'm
back.
the building my office is in terrible internet. And it goes out regularly. So really sorry.
No worries. It's actually perfect timing that you came back just now, because there's some questions in the chat, and I think you have experience with this in terms of like purchasing from FFA and paying for the processing out of your farm to school funds, or how that might work. Is that true that maybe you have navigated that process?
Yes, we a few years ago bought one of our students raised a FFA steer, and they took it to the processing place, and they actually donated it, I think. I can't remember now, but yeah, but we would have paid for whatever the market value was of the beef, and for one cow or whatever it's technically called, it's not going to be under your small procurement threshold. So even if you're not getting quotes or pricing or whatever, it's going to be below that 10,000, and you can purchase it without, I don't think, any real procurement problems. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and then I think the question was also around paying the processor. So even if it's donated, or if you're buying it direct from a student or FFA group, like, did you pay the processor directly from your farm to school grant?
I did not. The student, or the FFA student did. Or whoever bought the meat and then donated to us, but we didn't pay it. I don't know how that would work. Say you go to the auction and you buy it. I don't know how that process works. If then you must pay for it to be processed. So say as a district, you decide that's your plan. I think Richard Williams at ODE could definitely help with that if it was how to do that. But I don't know how that works if you're going to auction to pay for it. You might have Richard, I'm sure, could help you with that.
Yeah, so that sounds like a resource to kind of clarify sort of the steps in that process if folks are interested in doing that. Because I know it did come up in another conversation around being able to sort of support students, especially maybe some of the animals that didn't sell or weren't at like the market weight or whatever, if the school nutrition services could step in and still support those students in some way financially, and then also benefit from the local meat. So Amy and I can work on creating sort of that resource with the folks at ODE to make sure we understand that whole process.
You guys, hi, it's Katrina. And
yeah,
when we did our FFA program, we actually paid the FFA kids for their hogs, and then we paid the processor for the processing fee with our funds.
Great. Yeah, I was assuming that that's the way that it could work. So you have experience doing that. That's wonderful.
This is Michelle from LeGrand. I just, we had a nice situation this year with the Union County Fair where we had, businesses procuring and purchasing from the students who then donated back to school districts. And so that was nice. And we did use our farm to school grant funds for the processing of the donation. But that worked well. It was really nice donation that we received.
That sounds like a neat program. So are you saying that businesses bought it? So students benefited financially, but then they donated it back to the school?
Yes, many, several of the Union County school districts were recipients of donation back from the businesses that purchased, and I can't remember, we had a local Union County representative that was involved in the fair that actually contacted each of the schools and asked us if we would be willing to accept such a donation. And they were really driving that. And I think most schools, I think there was only one school that was willing to accept that was not a recipient. So most of us did benefit. It was super nice.
Nice. That sounds like a replicable model. That's a nice way for the community to support students and producers.
This is Jordan in Klamath Falls. Katrina, I have a follow-up question for you. You just said that the school district you work for paid FFA for the product itself. And I'm curious if the FFA had their own tax ID number, because we're trying to explore how to actually pay for the product, not just the processing to FFA, but our FFA chapters fall under the Klamath County School District's umbrella for the tax ID number. So we can't have the FFA chapters invoice our district to get paid directly. So we're trying to figure out maybe through an intergovernmental agreement. I know that's kind of a third pathway option that school districts can use for perhaps our situation. But Katrina, if you could speak to how you paid the FFA for the product, that would be great.
Well, Jordan, we went ahead, they didn't have a different tax ID. We just did it district wide. We actually paid it back to Mountain View. Let me think about this for a minute. Mountain View High School was the FFA hub. So we paid directly to that program. And then we paid to the processor. So we had to have a way. Jordan, let me do some investigation to figure out how we actually ended up doing that. I'm not positive they had their own. I think they might have had their own tax ID because they would have been a nonprofit.
Jordan, it's very common for districts to have inter-district transfers. Like Scenic, one of my schools will hire me to cater, and then they pay me. So it's all under the same umbrella, but it's just moving the money around. Does that make sense?
It does to me, but I had a meeting with our business office director, nutrition services supervisor this week, and our head accountant. And the confusion seems to be at the upper level of, and part of it, I think, gets muddy when the accountant and the business office director start asking about, well, what are the funding streams in terms of donations or otherwise to FFA, and how do they actually FFA track their inputs and expenditures so the district isn't like paying twice for something, or not even twice, but is paying for something that was already covered through donations. And so we're just trying to figure out, they mentioned the intergovernmental agreement, and maybe that is similar to what you're describing, Anne, as a inter-district transfer. But we're trying to figure out how do we actually figure out the production costs for a product that an FFA group is wanting to sell to the schools so that we, are being fiscally responsible.
Right. Well, and I would say FFA, do they have an invoicing process? They must have some sort of process so that people, like, because I invoice just I make an invoice in Excel and I track them, and that's how we show that this is how they're paying and this is what the documentation is. Just a thought on that end, if that's helpful, because I can't imagine this is going to be the first time this is going to happen. I'm sure that there's a process somewhere.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping to glean.
Well, Jordan, this is Katrina, and I will investigate, but I'm pretty sure we did it interdistrictly. And I can put you in contact with our operations manager who did all the money moving, and they can discuss with you how we did it.
That would be fantastic. I'll put my email contact in the chat for you, Katrina.
All right, great.
Thank you.
Awesome. That's a great connection. And maybe, Jordan, when and if you get a solid answer, could you share it with me so that I can make it available to others? I was just thinking that I know that this happens with school gardens. So I'm guessing there is for sure a way, because I know schools in Southern Oregon that have paid the school garden for the product, and it's gone into sort of their, coded fund in the district. So I'm just guessing there's got to be system.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm trying to keep track of the chat. And I also recognize that Christina just hopped on, which I wasn't totally sure she was going to be able to make it. So it's so nice that you're here, Christina. If you want to share anything about your beef purchasing for this group, that would be awesome. We've talked a little bit just about working with FFA and local producers to get different products and paying for the processing or not. So anything you might have to add or a little story to share would be great. And then I'll try to read the chat and circle back to some of the questions.
Yeah, sorry, I was late. I was actually out. My warehouse person is out because we have a bunch of people sick. So she's working in the kitchen. And so I was getting our beef delivered and putting it away in the freezer. That's why I'm late getting on the Zoom. I don't have much to say. I mean, our beef comes in from a local ranch here, and he invoices us. And so I'm not sure. I got to kind of catch up where you guys are all at with everything, but I haven't bought anything. Came in while you guys were talking about FFA and everything, and I haven't purchased from them. So, but we love the beef. We get 2 steers about every month. So.
Hi, Christina. This is Jordan Rainwater from the Klamath County School District. I help coordinate the Farm to School program, and we've also been procuring local beef. But I'm curious because you just mentioned 2 steers. Did you say every other month or every month? But
Every month.
Okay. So I'm imagining that does that put you above the micro purchase threshold?
Yes. I did have to get bids. We had to put out bids for here locally. There's 3 different ranches that would deliver to us or provide for us. And so I got bid process on from all of them.
Okay. And we're doing a similar, I mean, we have to do that same process in Klamath County. And one of my questions is about the aggregation and, projecting for the whole year. We have so many local ranchers that we could work with and purchase from. And, we want to serve equitably to our students. And so we tend to just focus our dollars on ground beef because we want that local product to reach all of our students. But we would also love to spread our dollars around, and it's challenging when we have to put a bid out for something and then it narrows the pool greatly. So I'm wondering, without skirting around the aggregation issue, and also keeping that equity in mind for serving, how school districts are getting creative around spreading the procurement dollars around producers.
Well, for us, I've also only purchased the ground beef so far, but we're actually going to start in that bid process. I asked for ground beef prices, roast prices, and carne asada. And so what I'm doing is it kind of worked out that it was really the only 3 that we have here in the Rogue Valley that gave us a bid, and each one had a portion that was better than the other. And so our ground beef is coming from one ranch, and then I'm going to start getting the carne asada from a different ranch. And then we're even looking at possibly starting next year getting the roasts from a different ranch as well. So it's kind of spreading it out a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
I also wonder, Jordan, it's too bad that Anne hopped off, because you might connect with her, because I know she tries to be really equitable and spread her money around, and has talked about like managing, that situation that you're talking about in terms of like too many micro purchases. So you might just check in with Anne too, because I know she's done that, dealt with that in her district, and maybe some other folks on the call too have anything to share.
Well, and Jordan, this is Katrina from Bend. I'm on the opposite. I need a multitude of beef. And so, we've been doing Painted Hills now for at least 15 years. And I think we ended up with 63,000 pounds last year of ground beef, because we go through 500 pounds of ground beef a week here in Bend. So again, we're going directly to Painted Hills just because I needed a bulk amount, and I couldn't get that I could not spread that around to other producers.
Sure.
It looks like there's a question in the chat, and maybe Karen, you could just come off mute and ask it. It's about processing and school approved sort of products.
Yeah, I'm pretty new to the whole thing. I know we have a processor, a meat producer out here, Pat and Tams, who's been selling direct to the schools for quite a while. But the others, ranchers that I've spoken with, are confused about just the whole thing, like making little tiny hamburgers and getting those small portions appropriately sized and priced through the processing facility, wherever it might be. So I just wondered about that, the ease of that. And I also wondered then if FFA is a micro purchase and they're selling direct to the school, can they use a custom direct a slaughter facility or person to sell directly to the school, who then uses it in the school meals?
This is
Amy,
Katrina. Yeah,
Okay.
Katrina again from Bend. And we actually went to a USDA processor in Prineville. So, we're in Bend. But we had to go to a USDA processor for our hogs from the FFA kids, because you have to have USDA approved to be as to use that meat in the school.
Okay.
And
That
then
makes
for the
sense.
hamburgers, we do get 6-to-1 hamburgers from Painted Hills, and they actually have the processor do that for us. And so that's how we're getting raw beef patties from Painted Hills.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah,
We'll
the
just-
micro purchasing. So even if the purchase is small or it's below the micro purchasing threshold of $10,000, it still has to be processed at a USDA inspected facility. Unfortunately, there's just no way around that requirement. So the custom exempt still at this point, even if it's a direct, the direct purchase can be with the rancher, but the processing side of things has to be at a USDA facility. And there's no exceptions for schools at this point in time.
Okay, and the state inspection process is still a long way off, or do we know if that's going to directly support our program?
The state meat inspection program just came online about a year ago. And what that means is that over time, those firms that are not USDA inspected, if they are interested in if they want to become, if they want to be able to sell beyond direct, or they want to come out of custom exempt status, they could do that through the state program if they have all of the infrastructure and licensing, a lot of the disposal requirements for carcasses and hides, all of that would need to be in compliance with USDA's rules, but ODA, the state, would inspect and approve them. And if they have state meat inspection approval, then they can start to expand their market base. They'd be able to sell to schools, they'd be able to sell to restaurants, they'd be able to sell to grocery stores, they'd be able to sell to wholesale distributors. But all of that would have to be within the state. So they could not do interstate commerce. They could not sell to Idaho. They could not sell to, they could not distribute across state lines under the state meat inspection program. So there's benefits and there are some limitations to the program as well, but it will be, my sense is it'll be some time, maybe, I think I said maybe 3 years, hopefully earlier for some firms. And I can redistribute the list of the grantees to everyone if that's helpful, because there are some grantees in some of your areas that received the grant funds to help them move towards compliance and make some infrastructure changes. So those firms might be ready earlier than others.
Nice.
But it'll be a slow, it will be a slow process. I mean, as you can imagine, we only had $2 million at the state level, and we had over, I think, $15 million in requests from processors. So, a lot of these infrastructure changes are extremely expensive. So it's going to take some time. And right now, I think there's 11 USDA inspected facilities in the state. And that is, and that's down from many from years ago. So it becomes increasingly, as these industries consolidate nationwide, just gets harder and harder to keep these smaller firms viable, make sure they have enough throughput from smaller ranchers. But that's really what the overarching goal is of the state meat inspection program, is to help small ranchers and smaller processors thrive in a local economy. So, hopefully hopefully this will work, but it will be a little bit, I think it will take some time to get those small firms approved to be able to sell to school markets.
Very good. Thanks, Amy.
I have a quick question for the group, just based on Michelle's comment and question in the chat. It sounds like 6-to-1 patty processing is an important offering for child nutrition programs. And I'm wondering, just in terms of like when Amy and I interact with processors, are there other products that you would really like or would be in high demand, you think, for child nutrition programs that processors should look towards being able to provide besides those patties?
Can you say what 6-to-1 means?
I mean, I'm guessing it means 6 patties to a pound, but that's just a guess. Does somebody who knows want to say?
That's correct. Yes.
Thanks.
Jordan's asking, does ground beef in patty form qualify as the same product as bulk ground beef from an aggregation purchase threshold perspective? It's a good question. I don't know the answer, but we could pass it to ODE unless Amy or someone else knows. It's a good question. I could see it both ways.
Yeah, I don't know about that one. It seems like it would be this. I think it would be the same.
It feels like it's the same, but it might be nice to get clarification.
Right, because burgers versus all the things that you do with ground beef, I mean, it is sort of, it's different, but it's the same. We'll ask. I'm gonna save this chat and circle back with ODE, see if I can find some answers.
Hey, Amy, I have a question. It's Katrina. I know there are one of the barriers that we have in Oregon is the rendering plant. And so is there any opportunities for building a rendering plant in the state of Oregon again, or are we still going to go to Washington for that? Because what I'm thinking of specifically in Burns, where the cattle folks want to co-op, but they can't seem to figure out how to butcher without a rendering plant.
Yeah, that's a good question. That has been a huge issue with bringing more of a huge consideration, I guess, of bringing more firms into compliance and moving more volume and not having the adequate waste industry. And there was earlier this fall, Tacoma Tide Flats, which is where a lot of the rendering happens. Maybe that's what you're referring to in Washington, but had a large fire and most of their facility plant burned. And so there's been a lot of conversation with WSDA, Washington State Department of Ag, Idaho State Department of Ag, and Oregon about co-locating a facility. I don't know the update on that, but I could ask our, we have a new state meat inspection coordinator now who's been kind of helpful even for this group. He's put together some Excel sheets of different processors and what they make. So we could share that again, because I think, to go back to one of the other questions about, processors that do the 6-to-1, we have a list of everyone that's processing meat and what they're processing it for, because they all have different types of licensure. I mean, we talked about custom exempt processing, but we also have retail exempt sellers who handle meat and put meat into, sausages and things that you can buy over the counter and things like that. So the state meat inspection program will give those types of firms also the opportunity to sell to schools. So there's some licensing changes there's licensing that will eventually be able to support different types of facilities being able to sell to schools over time as well. So, but I can go back to our new state meat inspection coordinator, ask him about the rendering question, Katrina, and let you know if he has any updates on that.
Great, thanks, Amy.
And Sarah's responding to in the chat. I don't know, Sarah, if you'd like to share more.
Hi, everybody. I just showed up at the end of this. And I'll listen to the recording, but that's something that came up in some of those rendering meetings earlier, is that some value-added companies have really diversified what they do with stuff that would have gone to as waste. And I know that's especially limited coming out of the custom exempt processing. So I think, you know, whenever we're talking about the waste stream, you know, as you mentioned, it needs to service not just USDA, but also the custom exempt markets. But I think there's some really great examples of value added stuff that could also reduce the waste stream. And, you know, some of that is non-food products and other things. So that's also part of the ongoing conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point. We are in the state's in conversations with Portland Leather Company about potentially taking some of the hides to make different products. Right now, it's right now what I'm hearing anyway is that a lot of it's stuck in the the cleaning of the hides and like the quality of the hides, and yeah, whether some of the local kind of leather makers or leather goods industry would be interested in coming into this process or investing in the supply chain that would be necessary for it. So, but that's a good point. Mm-hmm.
And in the past, the tanneries that we used to have that closed, a lot of that is because of environmental quality concerns from the byproducts of processing. But yeah, I mean, just because something, we haven't figured it out yet, doesn't mean that we can't.
That is the big issue with the location, as Katrina was asking about, because there are, if it's going to be in an urbanized area, like basically the water jurisdiction really limits what some of those industries can do versus in a more in rural areas where there's different water jurisdictions. So there's a lot of the waste management, waste reduction, DEQ comes into play there a lot too. So there's lots of different kind of policy arenas that get triggered with thinking about where best to locate these facilities.
Great. Well, in the interest of everyone's time and busy mornings that I'm sure you all have, gonna let folks go, but I appreciate everyone joining and sharing with each other. I hope folks are coming away with some more answers to questions and connections for how to find out more. And then Amy and I are gonna follow up and work together with some other partners to try to put together some user-friendly resources that hopefully will meet your needs and other child nutrition programs that are interested and struggling. So so thanks so much, and we'll be in touch.